My name is Naomi Carter, and I'm 29 years old. If you had looked at my life from the outside back then, you probably would have thought I was one of those women who had everything arranged in neat, sensible rows. I had a stable job, a clean apartment, bills paid on time, and a relationship that had lasted 3 years, which, these days, felt almost like an achievement. His name was Adrian. He was 27. Charming in the way some men are when they've learned how to soften selfishness with a tired smile and a quiet voice. For 3 years, I had mistaken that softness for emotional depth. Maybe that was my first mistake. The night everything cracked open didn't feel dramatic at first. That's what still gets me. No thunderstorm outside, no slammed doors, no lipstick on a collar or mysterious text flashing across a phone screen. Just a normal Tuesday. I had kicked off my shoes by the door, set my bag on the kitchen stool, and was deciding whether I had enough energy to cook or if eggs on toast counted as a real dinner. Adrian was sitting at the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like he was rehearsing grief. I remember pausing in the doorway and thinking, something is wrong. Not because he looked guilty, because he looked prepared. "Naomi," he said, and even the way he said my name made my stomach tighten. Too careful, too gentle. "Can we talk?" There are certain sentences that arrive already carrying a blade. I didn't sit right away. I just looked at him and said, "That usually means I'm not going to like what comes next." He let out a breath that sounded practiced. "I've just been feeling lost." Lost. That was the first word. Then came the rest. He needed space. He needed time to figure himself out. He felt like he'd lost a part of himself somewhere along the way. He didn't know who he was anymore. He cared about me so much, but right now he needed to step back and hear his own thoughts. No pressure, no fighting, no mess. Just some time, some distance, no contact for a while. He even cried. Not hard, not messily, just enough for the performance to feel grounded. I stood there listening to the whole thing with my arms folded, nails pressing into my own skin inside my sleeves, and what I remember most is how calm I sounded when I finally said, "So that's it?" "It's not like that," he said quickly. "It's not about ending us. I need to find my footing again." Find his footing. Find himself. Find clarity. Men who are about to betray you always seem to find a whole dictionary first. I asked where he was going to stay. He said with his sister Sophie, "Just for a little while. Just until his head was clear." He swore it wasn't about anyone else. He swore there wasn't another woman. He swore this had nothing to do with me and everything to do with where he was emotionally. That phrase almost made me laugh, where he was emotionally, as if emotions were a distant country and he needed to go backpacking through them. But I didn't laugh. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't beg, and I think some part of him had expected me to. Some part of him wanted tears because tears would have made him feel wanted, necessary, powerful. Instead, I nodded once and said, "Okay. If this is what you need, then take it." He looked almost relieved. That was what hurt most. Not the speech, not the request, the relief. He stood up slowly, as if waiting for me to stop him. I didn't. He packed a small bag with the kind of selective efficiency that only makes sense when somebody has already decided what they're doing before they ever sit you down to talk. A few shirts, jeans, toiletries, his laptop, charger, the watch I gave him on our second anniversary. He left the rest behind like he was placing a claim marker on our life. Temporary, his silence seemed to say. Pause, not ending. Just wait here until I decide what this means. At the door, he turned back to me. For one ridiculous second, I thought he might say something honest. Something ugly, maybe, but real. Instead, he opened his arms, and I let him hug me because I was too stunned to do anything else. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I didn't answer. The door closed behind him with a soft click. That sound should not have been enough to change the shape of a room, but it did. I stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the door. Like if I waited long enough, the whole scene would fold in on itself and reveal the trick. The part where somebody would step out and tell me this was all a misunderstanding. No one did. The apartment felt wrong immediately. Not empty. Wrong. Like it had been leaned on from one side for so long that the second the weight disappeared, everything tilted. The first week was worse than I want to admit. I went to work. I answered emails. I smiled when I needed to. I came home and moved through the apartment quietly, as if grief itself might be sleeping in the next room. I kept checking my phone, even though I had promised myself I wouldn't reach out. He had asked for no contact, and against every screaming instinct in my body, I respected it. That was the humiliating part. Even while I was breaking, I was still trying to be fair to him. I told myself maybe he really was overwhelmed. Maybe life had hit him harder than I'd understood. Maybe this was one of those painful adult moments where love wasn't enough and people genuinely did need time apart to think clearly. I replayed the past 6 months in my head, looking for warning signs, hidden resentments, clues I had missed. I examined myself like evidence. Had I become too practical? Too routine? Too easy to leave for later? When you're betrayed slowly, you don't notice the betrayal first. You notice yourself shrinking to make room for explanations. 10 days into his journey of self-discovery, I was in bed scrolling mindlessly because sleep had become one of those things that hovered just out of reach. That was when I saw the post. It came from his mother, Brenda. Brenda had always had the unsettling energy of a woman who believed manners could excuse almost anything. She smiled warmly, asked invasive questions sweetly, and had spent 3 years making me feel as though I was being assessed for suitability in a role I'd never applied for. Not disliked exactly, just measured, compared, quietly found lacking in some category she never named. Her caption was cheerful. Family Beach Week. So grateful we could all be together. Sometimes the best surprises are the ones that heal old bonds. My thumb stopped moving. The first photo was harmless enough. Brenda in oversized sunglasses beside Adrian's father. The second had his brother holding a drink and grinning at the camera. The third made my whole body go cold. Adrian was there, not miserable, not reflective, not alone. He was smiling in full sunlight, with his arm around a woman I recognized a half-second later and wished I hadn't. Vanessa, his high school sweetheart, the one he had once dismissed with a laugh and a shrug, the one he said had been ancient history, the one who never really mattered like that, the one I had been taught, very carefully, not to worry about. In the next photo, she was leaning into him at dinner, her hand on his shoulder, his face turned toward hers, in that soft, private way people have when they already know how the night is supposed to end. Then another. Then another. In one, Brenda had tagged her by name. That made it worse somehow. Not hidden, not accidental, not even discreet. Public. Bright. Blessed by his mother and uploaded like a family announcement. I sat up so fast the blanket fell to the floor. I went through every photo again, slower this time, my pulse beating hard in my throat. Brenda. Adrian's father. His brother. Adrian. Vanessa. Sunlight. Drinks. Dinners. Matching smiles. Easy closeness. There was no ambiguity left, no generous interpretation, no noble version of events waiting behind the curtain. He had not gone away to find himself. He had gone away to see whether he still wanted her, and he had wanted me quiet while he decided. I remember staring at my phone with this strange stillness settling over me. Not peace, not even anger at first. Something colder, something cleaner. Because betrayal hurts. But humiliation reorganizes you. Suddenly, the whole speech from that Tuesday night changed shape in my head. The tears, the soft voice, the request for space, the no contact. It all snapped into place with an ugliness so plain I almost felt stupid for not seeing it sooner. He hadn't wanted honesty. He had wanted convenience. He wanted the freedom to reopen an old door without closing the current one. He wanted me waiting in emotional storage while he tested another life. My chest hurt, but my mind had gone terrifyingly clear. I took screenshots of everything. Every photo, every tag, every smiling sunlit lie. Then I sent them to a private folder, backed them up, and stared into the dark room around me. The apartment no longer felt like a place where I had been left behind. It felt like a place where I had been placed on hold. And that, more than anything, woke something up in me. I swung my legs out of bed and stood there barefoot on the floor, phone still in my hand, heart pounding with a kind of quiet fury that had nothing to do with tears anymore. I looked toward the spare room. That room had slowly become Adrian's overflow over the last year. Clothes he never bothered to sort, boxes of old electronics, art prints, books, shoes, cords, jackets, random pieces of himself spread through my home like he had all the time in the world to decide what stayed and what went. For 10 days I had been acting like a woman waiting for an answer. Standing there in the dark, I realized I already had one. And by morning, I wasn't going to be waiting anymore. The next morning didn't feel like the aftermath of heartbreak. It felt like the start of a project. That was the only way I could survive it. If I let myself sit in the emotions, really sit in them, I knew I would spiral. I would replay every moment, every word, every touch, looking for the exact point where things had shifted without me noticing. And that kind of thinking doesn't give you answers. It just traps you in a loop. So I didn't do that. I made coffee. I opened my laptop, and I started a list. At the top, I wrote his name. Underneath it, I began itemizing everything that belonged to him. Not vaguely, not loosely, precisely. Clothes, shoes, jackets, watches, cables, books, old notebooks, art supplies he swore he'd use one day. The box of tangled chargers he never sorted, the extra sneakers tucked under the bed, the spare keys, the things in the kitchen he insisted were his system, the small, forgettable objects that only become visible when someone leaves. Every item had a line. Every line had a description. Every description had a purpose. Because if he thought I was going to sit still while he explored his options, he had misunderstood me completely. I moved to the spare room. For a second, I just stood in the doorway, looking at it. 3 years of someone slowly spreading into your space doesn't happen all at once. It happens in layers. A jacket here, a drawer there, a shelf that becomes theirs without a conversation. Until one day, the room doesn't feel like a room anymore. It feels like proof. Proof that you built something together. Or thought you did. I walked in, rolled up my sleeves, and started packing. Not violently, not emotionally, methodically. I folded each piece of clothing neatly, smoothed the fabric, placed it into boxes in clean stacks, shoes paired together, accessories grouped, electronics wrapped separately. I found old receipts, loose coins, half-finished sketches, things I didn't even know he still had. Each one went into its place. Every box got labeled. Every label got a number. Every number went into my list. And before I sealed each box, I took photos. Clear, detailed, undeniable. If anyone ever questioned what I did, I would have proof. Not because I was planning for a fight. Because I had already decided I wouldn't lose one. By the second day, the apartment looked different. Lighter. Like something had been peeled away. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was structured, controlled, mine. I didn't rush. I took my time. 3 full days. That's how long it took to pack everything he owned in my space. When I was done, I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by a neat row of sealed boxes, each one labeled, documented, and accounted for. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt finished. The next step was logistics. I researched courier services like I was planning a business shipment, compared prices, checked reviews, calculated insurance options. I wasn't about to send his things halfway across the city without protection, not out of kindness, but because I refused to give him even a single valid complaint. In the end, I chose a service that specialized in fragile shipments. 12 large boxes, insured, tracked, signature required upon delivery. Destination, his parents' house. Of course, I had the address. I had been there enough times to memorize the way the front door opened slightly too slow, like it was testing you before letting you in. When the courier arrived, I supervised the entire pickup, watched each box get loaded, checked each label, signed every form, kept copies of everything. When the truck finally pulled away, I stood there for a moment, arms crossed, watching it disappear down the street. That was it. 3 years of him in my life, reduced to 12 boxes and a tracking number. I went back upstairs, closed the door, and then I did something that felt almost ceremonial. I opened Facebook, scrolled to my profile, and changed my relationship status to single. No announcement, no caption, no explanation. Just a quiet update. Then I blocked him. Instagram, Facebook, phone, everything. Blocked his mother. Blocked Vanessa. Deleted his number. Deleted our photos from my phone, except for a few stored safely in a private folder. Not for nostalgia, for evidence, for memory, for whatever version of the future might need them. Clean, clinical, final. The first week after that felt strange. Not empty, not broken, different. I went back to the gym, met up with friends I hadn't seen in months, focused on work in a way I hadn't been able to before. And the silence, God, the silence stopped feeling like punishment. It started feeling like peace. No waiting, no checking my phone, no wondering when he would come back and what version of him would walk through the door, because he wasn't coming back. Not to me, and I wasn't waiting. 3 weeks passed like that. 3 quiet, steady weeks where my life began to feel like mine again. Until one night, an unknown number flashed across my screen. I almost didn't answer. Something in me hesitated, like my body already knew who it was before my mind caught up. But curiosity won. I picked up. Hello? There was a pause, then his voice. Soft, careful, familiar in a way that instantly made my chest tighten despite everything. Naomi, it's me. Of course it was. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, staring out at the city lights through the window. Adrian, I said, my voice calm, almost detached. What can I do for you? Another pause. Like he hadn't expected that tone. I think I'm ready to talk now. Ready. The word landed between us like it meant something. Like I had been waiting for it. Like everything we had was still sitting there, paused, untouched, waiting for him to press play again. I let the silence stretch long enough for him to feel it. Then I said evenly, without raising my voice, Adrian, there is no us to talk about anymore. For the first time since that Tuesday night, he went completely quiet. For a few seconds, there was nothing on the other end of the line. Then his voice cracked. What, Naomi, what are you talking about? I didn't answer right away. I let him sit in it. Because for once, I wasn't the one scrambling to understand. I repeated calmly, there's no us to figure out. Another pause. I could almost hear his mind trying to rearrange the situation back into something that made sense to him. Something where he still had control. Something where I was still waiting. That's not what I meant, he said quickly. I told you I needed a break, not that we were breaking up. There it was. The loophole. The carefully worded escape hatch that would have let him leave without consequences and return without accountability. I closed my eyes for a second, pressing my fingers lightly against the edge of the counter. You said no contact, I replied. You said you needed space to figure yourself out. I respected that. And I did, he said, almost defensively now. I've had time to think. I know what I want. I smiled, not because it was funny, because it was predictable. And what did you figure out? I asked. A small pause. Then, with a hint of smugness creeping back into his tone, he said, that I don't want to lose you. Of course. Not that he had done anything wrong. Not that he had lied. Not that he had used me as a safety net while he explored something else. Just that he didn't want to lose me. Like I was something misplaced. Something he could pick back up now that he'd checked the other option. I let out a quiet breath. Me, I said softly. No. That threw him. I could hear it. The confusion. The irritation. The disbelief starting to crack through his composure. What do you mean, no? He asked. Naomi, I'm saying I want us to work this out. And I'm saying, I replied, just as evenly, that I don't. The silence that followed felt charged. What changed? He asked finally, sharper now. What happened in 3 weeks that made you decide that? I tilted my head slightly, even though he couldn't see me. You really don't know? I asked. A beat. No, he said, slower this time. I don't. Right. Of course he didn't. Because in his version of events, everything had been managed, controlled, quiet. He had stepped away cleanly. No conflict, no mess. He hadn't counted on public evidence. Your mom posted photos, I said. Another pause. What? Family beach trip, sun, drinks, smiles, and you. Still nothing. And Vanessa, I added. That did it. The silence that followed wasn't confusion anymore. It was recognition. How did you... he started, then stopped himself. I almost laughed. Tagged, I said simply, publicly, by your mother. Oh my God, he muttered, and for the first time there was something real in his voice. Not guilt, not quite, but the realization that something had slipped out of his control. That wasn't what it looked like, he said quickly. Of course it wasn't. It never is. She was just there. It was a family thing. My brother invited her. It wasn't planned. Stop, I said. Just one word. But it cut clean through everything he was about to build. Things don't just happen, Adrian. You don't accidentally go on a vacation with your ex while telling your girlfriend you need solitude. It wasn't like that, he insisted, his voice tightening. I was confused. I needed space. That's all it was. To see if things with her would work, I said. No. Yes, I cut in. That's exactly what it was. His breathing changed. Faster now. Unsteady. You're twisting this, he said. You don't understand what I was going through. You're right, I said quietly. I don't. And that was the truth. I didn't understand how someone could look you in the eye, ask for patience, ask for trust, and then use that trust as cover for something else. But I do understand what I saw, I continued, and I understand what it means. Another pause. Then, softer now, I was going to come back. There it was. Not denial. Not even defense. Just entitlement, stripped bare. I leaned my head back slightly, staring at the ceiling. We were going to work through this, he added. I just needed time to figure it out. Figure what out? I asked. Whether she was a better option? No, he snapped. That's not fair. I let that hang. Because fairness had left the room a long time ago. I respected your space, I said after a moment. So much so that I made sure you had all of it. A pause. What does that mean? He asked slowly. I smiled again. This time there was no softness in it. It means all your things have been shipped to your parents' house. Dead silence. I could almost feel the moment land. Heavy. Cold. Permanent. You what? He whispered. Packed everything, I continued calmly. Clothes, shoes, electronics, your art supplies, everything that was in my apartment, labeled, documented, and sent. No, no, you can't just do that, he said quickly, panic starting to break through. Naomi, that's my stuff, my things. They were delivered, I added, cutting him off. About 3 weeks ago. Your father signed for them. I have the confirmation. His breathing hitched. What about my watch, my jackets, my... All accounted for, I said. Inventory list for each box. You're insane, he snapped. Do you have any idea how reckless that is? What if something broke? What if something got lost? It didn't, I replied. Insured. Another beat of silence. But this time it was smaller, more fragile. Because for the first time, he wasn't speaking from a position of control. He was reacting. And not to losing me, to losing access, to losing convenience, to losing the version of me that stayed still while he figured himself out. Naomi, he said again, softer now, like he was trying to reset the tone. You're overreacting. This isn't how you handle something like this. I let out a quiet breath. No, I said. This is exactly how I handle something like this. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then I heard it. A shift on the other end. A second voice. Older, sharper. Adrian, give me the phone. Of course. I didn't even need the introduction. Naomi, this is Brenda. I closed my eyes briefly, pressing my lips together. There it was. The enabler had entered the room. With all due respect, I said calmly, this is a conversation between Adrian and me. Was, she corrected immediately, her tone already edged with accusation. From what I just heard, you've made that very clear. I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms. Yes, I said, I have. You can't just throw his belongings out like that, she continued, voice rising slightly. He's devastated. That word almost made me laugh. Devastated. Not when he walked out. Not when he lied. Not when he stood in another woman's arms. But now he was devastated. I didn't throw anything out, I replied. I packed everything carefully and shipped it to your home. Fully insured, signed delivery. Nothing was lost. That trip was a misunderstanding, she pushed on, ignoring everything I said. Vanessa is a family friend. You're twisting things out of proportion. Family friend, I repeated slowly. The one he was holding in every photo you posted? A pause. Then, you're being dramatic. There it was. The pivot. Minimize, dismiss, reframe. Classic. I'm being accurate, I corrected. Before she could respond, Adrian cut back in, his voice tighter now. Naomi, listen. We're not doing this over the phone. We need to talk in person. I turned slightly toward my window. From where I stood, I could see the glow of headlights near the curb below. Something in his tone sharpened every instinct I had. In person? I repeated. Yes, he said, face to face. Then I heard it. A muted car door below. Footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. And a knock. Soft at first, then louder. I didn't say anything. I just walked toward the door, every nerve in my body tightening. Another knock. Then a voice from the other side. Naomi? My stomach dropped. Of course. He had called me while they were already on their way up. Or already outside. I pulled the door open anyway. And there they were. Adrian and Brenda, standing right outside my apartment like they had been building toward this moment together. For a second, none of us moved. Adrian looked worse. Tired. Eyes rimmed red. But there was something else there too. Expectation. Like he still believed this could be turned. Brenda stood slightly behind him, posture rigid, expression tight, eyes already scanning past me into the apartment like she was assessing territory. I stepped back just enough to block the doorway. Evening, I said flatly. Naomi, Adrian started, taking a small step forward. We need to talk, properly, face to face. I held up the phone between us. So that's why you called, I said. To keep me on the line while you came upstairs. His jaw tightened. That's not... It is, I said. Brenda stepped forward slightly, her voice sharp. Your behavior has been completely unacceptable. Packing his things, cutting him off like this, it's extreme. I raised an eyebrow. Extreme? You mean responding to a lie with a boundary? Adrian ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding through now. It was a mistake, he said. Vanessa doesn't matter. She never did. That landed harder than he probably intended, because now it wasn't just betrayal. It was replacement. Disposable. For her. For me. I held his gaze. Then why were you there? I asked quietly. He hesitated, and that hesitation said everything. I was confused, he said finally. And now you're not, I replied. No, he said quickly. Now I know I want you. I let out a slow breath. No, now you know she wasn't what you thought. That hit. I saw it. The flicker in his eyes. The truth he didn't want to admit out loud. Brenda stepped in again, voice rising. You're twisting everything. Adrian was vulnerable. He needed support. Any good mother would help her son through that. A good mother, I said calmly, doesn't facilitate a secret reunion with his ex while he's still in a relationship. Her lips pressed into a thin line. That's not what happened. It's exactly what happened. The tension snapped tighter. Adrian took another step forward. Naomi, please, he said, lowering his voice. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't move, didn't soften, didn't give him anything to hold on to. No, I said. Just that. Nothing more. His expression hardened. Not hurt. Not regret. Frustration. Like a door he expected to open had stayed locked. You're really going to throw away 3 years over one mistake? He asked. I looked at him for a long second. Then I answered quietly no. A pause. Then I added, I'm walking away because of the person you showed me you are. Silence. Heavy. Final. Brenda stepped forward again, voice dropping into something colder. You know, people talk. We have mutual friends. It would be a shame if they heard a different version of this story. There it was. The threat. Subtle. Polished. Ugly. I met her gaze directly. If you try to slander me, I have everything documented. Adrian blinked. Brenda's expression flickered. Photos, I continued. Screenshots. Courier receipts. Inventory lists. Delivery confirmations. And after your first call, I lifted the phone slightly. I started recording. That did it? The shift was instant. Adrian's face drained. Brenda's jaw tightened. You wouldn't dare, she said. I held her gaze. Try me. Then I stepped back, opened the door just enough to slip inside, and closed it in their faces. Locked it. Leaned against it, heart pounding in my chest. Outside, I heard nothing for a moment. Then footsteps. Fading. Retreating. Gone. I exhaled slowly, staring at the ceiling. That should have been the end. It felt like the end. But something in my gut told me they weren't done yet. For about 10 days after that night, there was nothing. No calls. No knocks. No unknown numbers lighting up my phone at the worst possible moment. Just silence. Real silence this time. The kind that settles into your bones and makes you almost believe the storm has passed. I went back to my routines. Work. Gym. Coffee with friends. Even started sleeping through the night again without waking up with that tight, hollow feeling in my chest. The apartment felt different now. Not just empty, but reclaimed. Like every corner had been reset to neutral. I started to think maybe they had finally understood. Maybe the door I closed had stayed closed. That was my mistake. It came in an email. Midday, between 2 meetings. Subject line, formal notice of claim. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. You know that feeling when your body recognizes something bad before your brain has time to catch up? That. I clicked. A scanned letter. Law firm header. Language so stiff it practically crackled through the screen. Adrian was seeking compensation. $5,000. For emotional distress, unlawful displacement, and loss of shared assets due to what they called my sudden and unjustified termination of a long-term cohabiting relationship. I stared at it. Then I laughed. Actually laughed. Out loud. In the middle of my kitchen. Because the audacity had somehow managed to evolve. It wasn't enough that he lied. It wasn't enough that he tried to come back. Now he wanted to be paid for the consequences of his own choices. I read it again, slower this time. Misappropriation of valuable personal items. That part nearly killed me. Because if there was one thing I had done perfectly, it was pack his things. Carefully. Documented. Insured. Signed. Delivered. There wasn't a single loose thread for him to pull on. And suddenly, everything from the past few weeks snapped into a new kind of clarity. This wasn't about reconciliation. This wasn't about closure. This was about control. I didn't panic. That was the difference between who I had been 3 weeks ago and who I was now. 3 weeks ago, that email would have shattered me. I would have questioned everything, wondered if I had gone too far, if I had made a mistake, if I needed to fix it. Now, I opened a new tab and called a lawyer. Not a dramatic, high-powered courtroom type. Just someone practical, calm. The same person who had helped me review my lease when I first moved into this apartment. Someone who understood paperwork, boundaries, and, most importantly, facts. $200 later, I had clarity, and something much more valuable than clarity. I had leverage. We drafted a response. Short, precise, cold. It outlined everything. Adrian's voluntary departure. His explicit request for no contact. The timeline, clean, documented, undeniable. Then came the attachments. Screenshots of Brenda's family vacation posts. Photos of Adrian and Vanessa, close enough that no reasonable person could call it coincidence. Courier receipts. Tracking confirmations. Signed delivery records. The full inventory list of every single item I had packed and shipped. Photos of each box before it was sealed. Every detail laid out like a blueprint. No emotion. No insults. Just facts. At the bottom, my lawyer added one final paragraph. Polite. Professional. Lethal. Any further attempts at harassment, defamation, or financial coercion would be met with a counterclaim. Then we sent it. And just like that, silence. Not the kind of silence you wait inside. The kind that lands like a door slamming shut. Final. Heavy. Unavoidable. Days passed. Then a week. Nothing. No reply. No follow-up. No second letter. And that told me everything I needed to know. Because people who are right don't disappear when faced with evidence. They escalate. They argue. They fight. Adrian didn't. Because Adrian couldn't. About a week later, I heard what happened next. Not from him. Of course not. From a mutual acquaintance. One of those neutral, observant people who somehow always end up knowing everything without ever being directly involved. Hey, she said casually over coffee, like she wasn't about to drop something explosive into my lap. So, I heard about the situation. I didn't react, just took a sip of my drink and waited. She leaned in slightly. Apparently your lawyer's response didn't go over well. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? She nodded. Adrian had a full meltdown, like actual meltdown, and Brenda, furious, not at you. A pause. At him. That surprised me slightly. Why? I asked. Because it backfired, she said simply. They thought they could pressure you, scare you into backing down. Instead, you documented everything. I let out a small breath. Of course they had. That's what people like them do. They test the boundary, push just enough to see if you'll fold. And when you don't, they don't know what to do next. There's more, she added. Of course there was. There always is, I said. She hesitated for a second, then said, Vanessa left. That landed quietly. Not dramatic. Not shocking. Just inevitable. Left, I repeated. She didn't want to deal with the drama, my friend said, or the legal mess. Apparently, once she realized how messy things were getting, she backed out. I nodded slowly. That made sense. Vanessa hadn't been part of the betrayal. She'd been part of the fantasy, and fantasies don't survive paperwork. So now, I asked? She shrugged. He's back at his parents' house, surrounded by boxes. I almost smiled, not out of cruelty, out of recognition. 3 years of my life, reduced to cardboard and inventory lists in someone else's home. Fitting. And Brenda? My friend snorted lightly. Still trying to spin it, she said, but it's not really working. How so? She leaned back in her chair. Because people saw the photos, the vacation, the timing. It doesn't add up the way she wants it to. Exactly. That was the thing about lies. They require control of the narrative, of the audience, of the details. And the moment something slips into the open, they start collapsing under their own weight. Some people actually started asking questions, she added. Like, didn't he go on that trip while he was still with you? I let out a quiet breath. There it was. Not revenge. Not even exposure. Just reality. And when the answers didn't match the story, she continued, people stopped buying it. I nodded. Because that's all it ever takes. Not a fight. Not a public scene. Just enough truth in the right place at the right time. My friend studied me for a moment. You okay? She asked. I thought about it. Really thought about it. The hurt, the anger, the humiliation, all of it still existed somewhere. But it didn't control me anymore. Yeah, I said finally. And for the first time, I meant it. A few weeks passed after that. No emails, no calls, no unexpected visits sitting outside my door like unfinished business. Just quiet. Real quiet this time. The kind that doesn't make you brace for impact. The kind that lets you breathe. I changed my number anyway. Not because I was scared. Because I was done leaving doors unlocked for people who had already shown me they didn't know how to walk through them properly. The apartment felt different now. Not just cleaner, clearer. Every object in it belonged to me again. Every corner, every drawer, every surface. No trace of hesitation. No leftover energy from someone who once treated this place like a temporary stop while deciding where he actually wanted to be. That was the part that took the longest to process. Not the betrayal itself, but the realization that while I had been building something real, he had been keeping options. I stood by the window one evening, watching the city settle into that soft golden blur. It gets right before night fully takes over, and I thought about how easily things could have gone differently. I could have begged, waited, explained, tried to compete with the memory he had never really let go of. I could have stayed exactly where he left me, paused, available. Convenient? But I didn't, and that changed everything. I won't pretend I handled it perfectly. There were nights I lay awake replaying conversations, wishing I had said things differently. Moments where the anger came back sharp and sudden, cutting through whatever calm I had built. Times where I questioned whether walking away without a fight made me weak. It didn't. It made me free. Because here's the part no one really tells you about betrayal. It's not just about what they did. It's about what they expected you to tolerate. Adrian didn't just lie. He assumed I would understand, that I would wait, that I would accept whatever version of the truth he brought back after he was done exploring something else. That assumption was the real breaking point. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. A few days ago, I heard one last update through the same mutual friend. Apparently, Adrian had tried, quietly, to reach out to a couple of people in our circle, testing the waters, trying to see what version of the story had stuck. It didn't go the way he expected. People weren't angry. They weren't dramatic. They were distant, polite, careful, the kind of distance that says, I see you differently now. That, more than anything, seemed to get to him. Not losing me. Not losing Vanessa. Losing the version of himself he thought everyone believed in. Brenda, from what I heard, was still insisting that I had overreacted. Still framing it as a misunderstanding. Still trying to smooth over something that had already been exposed. But it didn't matter anymore, because I wasn't part of that narrative. Not anymore. That chapter had closed the moment I decided not to argue with a lie. The moment I chose documentation over emotion. Clarity over chaos. Boundaries over second chances. Last weekend I went on a date. Nothing serious. No expectations. Just coffee. Conversation. A man who listened when I spoke and didn't make promises he couldn't keep. And for the first time in a long time, it felt simple. Not easy, but simple. There's a difference. I walked back into my apartment that evening, set my keys down on the table, and paused for a second in the doorway. Same space, same walls. But I wasn't the same person who had stood there weeks ago, staring at a closed door, waiting for it to open again. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't wondering. And I definitely wasn't available for someone who needed to figure things out at my expense. People like to talk about revenge, about getting even, about making sure the other person feels what you felt. But the truth is, the most effective kind of revenge doesn't look like revenge at all. It looks like distance, like silence, like closing every door so cleanly that the other person is left standing on the outside, holding nothing but their own choices. Adrian wanted time to figure himself out. He got it, just not with me waiting on the other side. And if there's one thing this whole mess taught me, it's this. When someone asks for space while keeping you as an option, don't argue, don't chase, don't explain. Just remove yourself completely and let their own decisions finish the story for you.